All right, how's everyone doing today? In this video, we're going to read through the final two chapters of 1984 by George Orwell. This will not be a typical reading because we are going to stop and talk about interesting vocabulary words or the meaning of phrases that you don't know. So if you're learning English, this is very useful because we can learn a lot of things that could be hard to understand if you were reading this on your own. These are going to be, there are two chapters left in the book, and I'm just going to read them both today. I don't know how long this will take. It's about 50 pages, but I'm just excited to finally be finishing the book. I can't believe we made it this far. So it will take a while, I think. Uh-oh. Sorry, I've got to fix this audio here. Something is going on. Wait a minute. Okay, well, in the last chapter, Winston was being tortured, and they were explaining to him that, yes, they will kill him, but first they want to purify his brain and make him truly believe in the party again, and then die. So he was being horribly tortured in the last chapter, and that's where we left off, in room 101. All right, so he was much better. He was growing fatter and stronger every day, and it was proper, if it was proper to speak of days. The white light and the humming sound were the same as ever. Humming is that's what humming is, but also it could be like the sound of electrical things, like or the fluorescent lights, the long lights, they make kind of a noise. That could be humming too, and I think that's what they're referring to here. Okay. So the white light and the humming sound were the same as ever, but the cell was a little more comfortable, and the others had been in. There was a pillow and a mattress on the plank bed. A plank is a long piece of wood. So I guess we can imagine either it's probably not a comfortable bed. It's probably just a piece of wood that he's laying on. There was a pillow and a mattress on the plank bed, and a stool to sit on. They had given him a bath, and they allowed him to wash himself fairly frequently in a tin basin. A basin is, well, I guess maybe we should look at a picture of a basin. It's just something to hold water. Let's look at a picture. Whoops. Why is that showing me over here? Okay. Technically, I mean, you would call this a sink, but you could also call it a basin because it's something to hold water. But when they say basin, I kind of imagine like this red thing here, more than a sink, but who knows? Because it sounds pretty primitive, the cell where he's being held. Weeks or months must have passed. It would have been possible to keep count of the passage of time, if he had felt any interest in doing so. Since he was being fed, and what appeared to be regular intervals, he was getting, he judged, 3 meals in 24 hours. So remember, there are no windows, and you can never tell if it's day or night, or what time it is, or how long you've been there. But because they were feeding him at regular intervals, 3 times a day, you could imagine one thing was lunch, and one thing was breakfast, and one thing was dinner. So maybe you could count the days like that. Sometimes he wondered dimly whether he was getting them by night or by day. And we've seen that word dim being used several times in the book. Dim is the opposite of bright. So there's some light, but it's just a little bit of light. That's what dim means. But you can use it to mean like a dim idea or a dim memory. It means not a very strong idea or not a very strong memory. Sometimes he wondered dimly, so he just wondered a little bit, whether he was getting them by day or night. The food was surprisingly good, with meat at every third meal. Once there was even a packet of cigarettes. He had no matches, but the never-speaking guard who brought his food would give him a light. The first time he tried to smoke, it made him sick, but he preserved and spun the packet out for a long time, smoking half a cigarette after each meal. So he's just saying that he didn't smoke all of the cigarettes at once, but saved them. They had given him a white slate with a stump of a pencil tied to the corner. A slate is something that you use to write on. Let's see. Just so you can imagine. Or you can see what it, let's see. The problem is that when you think of slate, you actually, before paper was a very common thing. In school, you would write on something like this. So that's a slate, but this is a white slate. So I don't know if that actually means that it was paper. Oh, and a stump. We've had that word also before. A stump is this, just to review, since they've mentioned that word before. A stump is like the part of a tree that's left after it's cut. But what do you think a stump of a pencil could be? It'd be like maybe a very, very small piece of a pencil. At first he made no use of it. Even when he was awake, he was completely torpid. Okay, I don't know what that word means, torpid. Let's look it up. Torpid, mentally and physically inactive, lethargic. But I don't think that's a very common word, torpid. So that means feeling lazy, tired, not wanting to do anything. Even when he was awake, he was completely torpid, so he didn't feel like doing anything. Often he would lie for one meal to the next, almost without stirring. And remember, stirring means moving, so he would just lie and do nothing on his plank bed. Sometimes asleep, sometimes waking into vague reveries in which it was too much trouble to open his eyes. He had long grown used to sleeping with a strong light on his face. It seemed to make no difference, except that one's dreams were more coherent. Coherent means something you could follow. So if something is coherent, maybe it's like a story with a beginning and a middle and an end. A lot of times if you have a dream, it makes no sense. And it's not really a story, it's just a little image that you see or pictures in your mind. But if it's a coherent dream, it kind of means it's something you could follow, like it was a story. It was understandable. He dreamed a great deal all through his time, and they were always happy dreams. He was in the Golden Country. Or he was sitting among enormous, glorious sunlit ruins with his mother, with Julia, with O'Brien. Not doing anything, merely sitting in the sun, talking of peaceful things. Such thoughts as he had when he was awake were mostly about his dreams. He seemed to have lost the power of intellectual effort. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, I always mention this in the beginning, if you're watching this live and you have a question about a word or a phrase that I didn't explain, I really want you to ask questions, because that makes the video much more interesting when we talk about the meanings of phrases or words. He was not bored. He had no desire for conversation or distraction, merely to be alone, not to be beaten or questioned. To have enough to eat and to be clean all over was completely satisfying. By degrees, he came to spend less time in sleep, but he still felt no impulse to get off the bed. All he cared for was to lie quiet and feel the strength gathering in his body. He would finger himself here and there, trying to make sure that it was not an illusion, that his muscles were growing rounder and his skin tauter. So I think he means like maybe he was feeling his muscles like, wow, I'm getting stronger. Let's look at that word taut. What does that mean? Taut. I think that's related to tight. Let's see. Stretched or pulled tight. Yeah. Finally, it was established beyond a doubt that he was growing fatter. His thighs were definitely thicker than his knees. After that, reluctantly at first, he began exercising himself regularly. If you're reluctant to do something, that means you don't want to do it. So he decided it was a good idea to do some exercise, but at first he was reluctant. He didn't want to do it. He didn't feel like it. But I guess he got into the habit. In a little... Sorry, I think my voice is still waking up. In a little while, he could walk 3 kilometers, measured by pacing the cell, and his bowed shoulders were growing straighter. He attempted more elaborate exercises and was astonished, that means surprised, and humiliated to find that things he could not do, he was astonished and humiliated to find what things he could not do. He could not move out of a walk. He could not hold his stool out at arm's length. That means he couldn't hold the stool like this. Arm's length is when your arms are straight. He could not stand on one leg without falling over. He squatted down on his heels and found with agonizing pains in thigh and calf, he could just lift himself to a standing position. Let me show you what a squat is. Squatting is like a lower standing position, like this guy. It's also an exercise. So this exercise is called squatting because when you lower yourself to the floor, that is a squatting position. So Winston was trying this exercise, but it was very difficult for him to stand back up. Let's reread that. Whoops. I think I'm still waking up. I can't. Okay, he squatted down on his heels and found that with agonizing pain, agonizing means really horrible pain, very painful pain. In the thigh and calf, he could just lift himself up to a standing position. So he would get down, but then when he tried to get up, it was very painful and difficult to do that. But he could do it. He lay flat on his belly and tried to lift his weight by his hands. It was hopeless. Belly is just another word for stomach. It was hopeless. He could not raise himself a centimeter. But after a few more days, a few more meal times, even that feat was accomplished. A feat is something that you do, something that you accomplish, something that you're able to do. Usually when you call something a feat, it's something amazing. Wait, what happens if I look for a picture of an amazing feat? Okay, yeah, the first picture is pretty amazing. See, this woman is doing something very amazing. This is a feat. It's something that you do that is amazing. So you would call this a feat. And for Winston, doing exercise was a feat. He was amazed that he could actually do it because it was so difficult for him to accomplish. A time came when he could do it 6 times running. He began to grow actually proud of his body and to cherish an intermittent belief that his face also was growing back to normal. To cherish something is to love something. So he cherished the idea, he really loved the idea that maybe even his face was beginning to look normal again. Only when he chanced to put his hand on his bald scalp did he remember the seamed, ruined face that had looked back at him in the mirror. Scalp is this part of the head. It's the part under the hair. That's your scalp. So only when he if you chance to do something, you do it accidentally. So he wasn't checking himself, but maybe one time he touched his head and then he realized, oh, I don't have hair anymore. I just have a scalp. Did he remember the seamed, ruined face that looked back at him in the mirror? His mind grew more active. He sat down on the plank bed, his back against the wall, and the slate on his knees, and set to work deliberately at the task of re-educating himself. He had capitulated. Capitulate means like surrender. I give up. So he surrendered. He wasn't against the party anymore. He was a true believer again. He had capitulated. That was agreed. In reality, he saw now that he had been ready to capitulate long before he had taken the decision. From the moment he was inside the ministry of love, and yes, even during those minutes when he and Julia had stood helpless while the iron voice from the telescreen told them what to do, he had grasped the frivolity, the shallowness of his attempt to set himself up against the power of the party. Okay, now we have this word frivolity. Frivolous means like unimportant or useless, something like that. Well, let's check the definition. Frivolous. Kind of like ridiculous. Let's see. Not having any serious purpose or value. All right, so from the moment that they were arrested, he realized that going against the party was frivolous or not serious. It would have no serious outcome. No, he wouldn't be able to defeat the party. It was stupid to try. Shallow means like superficial. So again, going against the party was a shallow thing to do because wasn't going to result in anything positive. Let's read that again. So he had grasped the frivolity, the idea that there was no value in doing this, going against the party, and the shallowness, it was very superficial, of his attempt to set himself up against the power of the party. He knew that for 7 years, the thought police had watched him like a beetle under a magnifying glass. There was no physical act, no words spoken aloud that they had not noticed, no train of thought that they had not been able to infer. Even the speck of whitish dust on the cover of his diary they had carefully replaced. A speck is like a little piece. So imagine if you could isolate one little piece of dust, that would be a speck of dust. Very small. They had played soundtracks to him, shown him photographs. Some of them were photographs of Julia and himself. Yes, even he could not fight against the party any longer. Yes, even he could not fight against the party any longer. Besides, the party was in the right. It must be so. How could the immortal collective brain be mistaken? By what external standard could you check its judgments? Sanity was statistical. It was merely a question of learning to think as they thought only. The pencil felt thick and awkward in his fingers, and he began to write down the thoughts that came into his head. He wrote first in large, clumsy capitals. So the pen felt thick and awkward or uncomfortable in his hands. I guess because he'd been tortured for so long, even trying to hold a pencil was difficult. He began to write down the thoughts that came into his head. He wrote first in large, clumsy capitals. Clumsy means it's the opposite of coordinated, if you know that word. But a clumsy person is always falling or dropping things. To be clumsy means you don't manage things very well. So when he first tried to write, since he hadn't written for a long time, the letters were clumsy. They weren't very good. They didn't look very nice. Freedom is slavery. Then, almost without pause, he wrote beneath it, 2 and 2 make 5. Then there came a sort of check, his mind, as though shying away from something. To shy away from something is like to avoid something. So let's see, how are they using it here? But then there came a sort of check, his mind, as though shying away from something, seemed unable to concentrate. He knew what came next, but for the moment he could not recall it. When he did recall it, it was only by consciously reasoning out what it must be. It did not come of its own accord. He wrote, God is power. When something happens of its own accord, it means it happens alone, by itself. It just naturally happens. The opposite of something happening of its own accord is something being forced to happen. So he's writing down these slogans of the party, and he knew to write freedom is slavery. That was easy. And 2 and 2 make 5. That was easy. But the third one, that didn't just come out of his head. He had to think about it and concentrate for a minute to think about what it was. It didn't happen of its own accord. It had to be forced out of him. He accepted everything. The past was alterable. The past had never been altered. Oceania was at war with East Asia. Oceania had always been at war with East Asia. Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford were guilty of the crimes that they were charged with. He had never seen the photograph that disproved their guilt. It had never existed. He had invented it. He remembered remembering contrary things, but those were false memories, products of self-deception. How easy it all was. Only surrender, and everything else followed. It was like swimming against a current that swept you backwards, however hard you struggled. So imagine if the current of the river is going this way and you're trying to swim this way. That would be very difficult. And that's what he means. How easy it was. Only surrender and everything else followed. It was like swimming against a current that swept you backwards. Sweeping is this motion. Sweeping. However hard you struggled, and then suddenly deciding to turn around and go with the current instead of opposing it. So before, when he was opposing the party, it was like swimming against the current. But now he just accepted everything and he moved along with the current, and that was very easy. Nothing had changed except your own attitude. The predestined thing happened in any case. He hardly knew why he had ever rebelled. Everything was easy except... Anything could be true. The so-called laws of nature were nonsense. The law of gravity was nonsense. If I wished, O'Brien said, I could float off this floor like a soap bubble. Winston worked it out. That means... To work something out means to make sense of it. So, O'Brien says this ridiculous thing. I could fly up from the floor if I wanted to. I just don't want to. And Winston worked it out in his head. Like he made it make sense in his head. If he thinks he floats off the floor, and if I simultaneously think I see him do it, then the thing happens. See, that's him working it out, making it logical somehow. Suddenly, like a lump of submerged wreckage breaking the surface of the water, the thought burst into his mind. It doesn't really happen. We imagine it. It is hallucination. He pushed the thought under instantly. The fallacy was obvious. It presupposed that somewhere or other outside of oneself there was a real world where real things happened. But how could there be such a world? What knowledge have we of anything save through our own minds? All happenings are in the mind. Whatever happens in all minds truly happens. He had no difficulty in disposing of the fallacy, and he was in no danger of succumbing to it. He realized, nevertheless, that it ought never to have occurred to him. The mind should develop a blind spot whenever a dangerous thought presented itself. A blind spot, blind means you can't see, so a blind spot is an area where you can't see what's happening. So if there's ever something that doesn't make sense, then the mind should develop a blind spot. Just don't look at it. Just don't see it. And you'll be fine. The process should be automatic, instinctive, crime stop, they called it in Newspeak. He set to work to exercise himself in crime stop. He presented himself with propositions. The party says the earth is flat. The party says that ice is heavier than water. And trained himself in not seeing or not understanding the arguments that contradicted them. It was not easy. It needed great powers of reasoning and improvisation. Improvisation is when you think of things spontaneously in the moment. So when you improvise something, you just invent it at that moment. So believing these things required what? It required great powers of reasoning, because you had to if they say 4 and 2 and 2 make 5, you have to somehow logically in your head make that make sense so that you believe it. And that sometimes requires improvisation, thinking and inventing something in the moment. The arithmetical problem raised, for instance, by such a statement as 2 and 2 make 5, were beyond his intellectual grasp. It needed also a sort of athleticism of the mind, an ability at one moment to make the most delicate use of logic, and the next to be unconscious of the crudest logical errors. Stupidity was as necessary as intelligence, and as difficult to attain. All the while, with one part of his mind, he wondered how soon they would shoot him. Everything depends on yourself, O'Brien had said, but he knew there was no conscious act by which he could bring it nearer. It might be 10 minutes hence. That means 10 minutes from here, 10 minutes from now. Or 10 years. They might keep him for years in solitary confinement. They might send him to a labor camp. They might release him for a while, as they sometimes did. It was perfectly possible that before he was shot, the whole drama of his arrest and interrogation would be enacted all over again. The one certain thing was that death never came at an expected moment. The tradition, the unspoken tradition, when you say that something is unspoken, it means it's not official. There's no rule. It's not written somewhere. So nobody ever says you have to do it this way, but that's the way everybody always does it. That's what it means by unspoken there. Somehow you knew it, though you never heard it said, was that they shot you from behind, always in the back of the head, without warning, as you walked down a corridor from cell to cell. One day was not the right expression, just as probably it was in the middle of the night. Once he fell into a strange, blissful reverie. He was walking down the corridor, waiting for the bullet. He knew that it was coming in another moment. Everything was settled, smoothed out, reconciled. There were no more doubts, no more arguments, no more pain, no more fear. His body was healthy and strong. He walked easily with the joy of movement and with a feeling of walking in sunlight. He was not any longer in the narrow white corridors of the Ministry of Love. He was in the enormous sunlit passage, a kilometer wide, down which he had seemed to walk in the delirium induced by drugs. He was in the golden country, following the foot track across the old rabbit-cropped pasture. If you use crop as a verb, that means like cutting something. If you crop something, it's like you're trimming or cutting something. So a rabbit-cropped pasture is a field where the rabbits have eaten a lot of the grass and made it not so tall. It's like they were cutting it. He could feel the short, springy turf under his feet and the gentle sunshine on his face. At the edge of the field were the elm trees, faintly stirring, and somewhere beyond that was the stream where the dace lie in the green pools under the willows. What's a dace? A small freshwater fish. I think we had that word earlier. It's a type of fish. I've never heard of it before. Suddenly, he started up with the shock of horror. And we've seen that word start, but I just want to always mention it because probably you know the word start meaning begin, but this is the verb to start, which means to be surprised. So when you, maybe you've heard the word startled before, it comes from the same word, which means very surprised, in a bad way usually. So when you start, it's like you jump up. That's starting. Suddenly, he started up with a shock of horror. Sweat broke out on his backbone. He had heard himself cry aloud. Julia, 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 my love, Julia. Uh-oh. He cried it aloud, so he was dreaming, but then he said out loud, Julia, 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 so that will get him in trouble probably. For a moment, he had an overwhelming hallucination of her presence. She had seemed to be not merely with him, but inside him. It was as though she had got into the texture of his skin. In that moment, he had loved her far more than he had ever done when they were together and free. Also, he knew that somewhere or other she was still alive and needed his help. He lay back on the bed and tried to compose himself. What had he done? How many years had he added to his servitude by that moment of weakness? Yeah, I think that's going to get him in some trouble. In another moment, he would hear the tramp of boots. Remember, imagine the sound of soldiers marching. Boom, boom, boom. That's tramping. He heard the tramping of boots outside. They could not let such an outburst go unpunished. They would know now, if they had not known before, that he was breaking the agreement he had made with them. He obeyed the party, but he still hated the party. In the old days, he had hidden a heretical mind beneath the appearance of conformity. So we've had that word heretical before. That's kind of a religious word. That's somebody who says something against the religion. So, if you live in a very religious society and you say something offensive about that religion, you are a heretic. But they're using it here to talk about politics. So his heretical mind means he's, imagine somebody protesting a religion to a bunch of religious people, and they want to kill him or burn him for saying such horrible things. A heretical mind beneath an appearance of conformity. And conformity means to go along with the group, to always agree with the group, or to agree with the people you're around. So he had hidden his heretical mind by being very conformist, by always doing exactly what the group was doing. Now he had retreated a step further. In the mind he had surrendered, but he had hoped to keep the inner heart inviolate. So he surrendered his mind to the party, but he didn't surrender his heart. He still loved Julia and wanted to save her. So he hasn't given his heart to the party, so I guess that's heretical. He knew that he was in the wrong, but he preferred to be in the wrong. They would understand that. O'Brien would understand it. It was all confessed in that single foolish cry. He would have to start all over again. It might take years. He ran a hand over his face. That means he went like this, trying to familiarize himself with the new shape. There were deep furrows in the cheek. I think that means that it was kind of going in. Well, let's just check the word furrow. Maybe like a wrinkle. Let's see. A long, narrow trench made in the ground by a plow. So you could imagine maybe like because he was starving, his cheeks were going in. There were deep furrows in the cheeks. The cheekbones felt sharp, the nose flattened. Besides, since last seeing himself in the glass, he had been given a complete new set of teeth. It was not easy to preserve inscrutability when you did not know what your face looked like. Oh, inscrutable. I just want to check. I mean, I have my own definition, but I don't trust it. So, not readily investigated or interpreted. So, let's look at that again. So, it was not easy to preserve inscrutability. So, it was not easy to... Inscrutable means not readily investigated, interpreted, or understood. It was not easy to preserve. Uh, if you wanted to be inscrutable, that would mean like you wouldn't want people to know what you were thinking. Because your face always shows what kind of emotions you have or what you're thinking. You can tell a lot by looking at the facial expressions. But if you want to be inscrutable, that would be like, I don't know if you've ever heard the expression like a poker face. That means people can't read the expression. They don't know what you're thinking by looking at your face. And so it's saying here that it wasn't easy for Winston to preserve inscrutability. It wasn't easy for Winston to hide his thoughts or feelings from the others because he couldn't remember what his face looked like since it had changed. In any case, mere control of the features was not enough. For the first time, he perceived that if you want to keep a secret, you must also hide it from yourself. You must know all the while that it's there, but until it is needed, you must never let it emerge into your consciousness in any shape that could be given a name. From now onwards, he must not only think right, he must feel right, dream right, and all the while he must keep his hatred locked up inside of him like a ball of matter, which was part of himself, yet unconnected with the rest of him, a kind of cyst. Well, you're not going to like this, but I guess we should look at what a cyst is. Maybe the picture won't be too... Okay, this will work. Let me just move that over here. I'll show you. This is a cyst. That's a cyst. These are all cysts. Okay, it's just like an infection that you get sometimes. How did they use it? Let's reread that. And all the while he must keep the hatred locked inside of him like a ball of matter, which was part of him, yet unconnected with the rest of him, a kind of cyst. So he's got to isolate that hatred and keep it like a ball inside of him, like a cyst. One day they would decide to shoot him. You could not tell when it would happen, but a few seconds beforehand it should be possible to guess. It was always from behind, walking down a corridor. 10 seconds would be enough. In that time, the world inside him could turn over. And then suddenly, without a word uttered, without a check in his step, without the changing of a line in his face, suddenly the camouflage would be down and bang! Bang would go the batteries of his hatred. Hatred would fill him like an enormous roaring flame, and almost in the same instant, bang, would go the bullet, too. Or too early. They would have blown his brain to pieces before they could reclaim it. The heretical thought would be unpunished, unrepented, out of their reach forever. They would have blown a hole in their own perfection. To die hating them, that was freedom. He shut his eyes. It was more difficult than accepting an intellectual discipline. It was a question of degrading himself, mutilating himself. He got to plunge into the filthiest of filth. To plunge into something, imagine like jumping into a pool. Or actually, plunging is like when something goes down into water really fast. So maybe you recognize this item. Let me show you a picture. This is a plunger, because what you do with a plunger, you go down really fast into the water. That's plunging. Except he's not plunging into water, he's plunging into filth, which is dirt, extreme dirtiness. What was the most horrible, sickening thing of all? He thought of Big Brother, the enormous face. Because of constantly seeing it on posters, he always thought of it as being a meter wide, with its heavy black mustache and the eyes that followed you to and fro, seemed to float into his mind of its own accord. So again, remember, of its own accord means it's not forced. It just happens naturally. It just comes because it comes. So he wasn't trying to think of Big Brother. That image would just appear in his head of its own accord. What were his true feelings towards Big Brother? There was a heavy tramp of boots in the passage. Boom, 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 boom. And the steel door swung open with a clang. The clang is the sound that metal makes when it hits other pieces of metal. O'Brien walked into the cell. Behind him were the waxen-faced officer and the black uniformed guards. "Get up," said O'Brien. "Come here." Winston stood opposite him. O'Brien took Winston's shoulders between his strong hands and looked at him closely. "You've had thoughts of deceiving me," he said. "That was stupid. Stand up straighter. Look me in the face." He paused and went on in a gentler tone. "You're improving. Intellectually, there's very little wrong with you. It's only emotionally that you have failed to make progress. Tell me, Winston, and remember, no lies. You know that I'm always able to detect a lie. Tell me, what are your true feelings towards Big Brother?" "I hate him." "You hate him. Good. Then the time has come for you to take the last step. You must love Big Brother. It's not enough to obey him. You must love him." He released Winston with a little push towards the guards. "Room 101, he said. Okay, now we are getting chapter 5. I think this is the last chapter, and we're going to read it. But before we start, I'm just going to take a little break. So I will be back in 1 minute. Okay, thanks for waiting. Oops. Let's see. Okay, well, this is exciting. This is the last chapter. We've gone all the way through the book now. I can't believe it. I hate for it to end, actually. But here we go. Here's chapter 5. At each stage of his imprisonment, he had known, or seemed to know, whereabouts he was in the windowless building. Possibly there was a slight difference in the air pressure. The cells where the guards had beaten him were below ground level. The room where he had been interrogated by O'Brien was high up near the roof. This place was many meters underground, as deep down as it was possible to go. It was bigger than most of the cells he had been in, but he hardly noticed his surroundings. All he noticed was that there were two small tables straight in front of him, each covered with green baize. What does that word mean, baize? I don't know that word. Let's see. A coarse, typically green woolen material resembling felt, used especially for covering pool. Oh, so kind of like the cloth on a pool table or a snooker table. In case you don't know what that is, I'll show you what it looks like. Not that it's very important. I've never used that word in my life. But this is the material. One was only a meter or two away from him. The other were further away, near the door. He was strapped upright in a chair, so tightly that he could move nothing, not even his head. A sort of pad gripped his head from behind, forcing him to look straight in front of him. For a moment he was alone, and then the door opened and O'Brien came in. "You asked me once," said O'Brien, "what was in room 101. I told you that you knew the answer already. Everyone knows it. The thing that is in room 101 is the worst thing in the world." The door opened again. A guard came in, carrying something made of wire, a box or basket of some kind. He set it down on the further table. Because of the position in which O'Brien was standing, Winston could not see what the thing was. "The worst thing in the world," said O'Brien, "varies from individual to individual. It may be burial alive, or death by fire, or by drowning, or by impalement. Impalement is when you take something and you and you penetrate. It's not like a stab, like with a knife, because when you're impaled, I think it goes all the way through. So it goes in this side and it comes out the other side, and that's impalement. Or 50 other deaths. There are cases where it is some quite trivial thing, not even fatal. Fatal means that it will kill you. He had moved a little to one side so that Winston had a better view of the thing that was on the table. It was an oblong wire cage. Oblong, it means like rectangle shape. So it's long in one direction, but it's short on the sides. It was an oblong wire cage with a handle on top for carrying it by. Fixed to the front of it was something that looked like a fencing mask. Fencing is the art of fighting with a sword. And so when people are practicing fencing, they wear maybe we'll take a look at it. Fencing mask. So you can picture it in case you don't know what I'm talking about. So when people are practicing sword fighting as a sport, they wear this for protection. This is a fencing mask. It was an oblong wire cage with a handle on top for carrying it by. Fixed to the front of it was something that looked like a fencing mask, with a concave side outwards. Although it was 3 or 4 meters away from him, He could see that the cage was divided lengthways into two compartments, and there was some kind of creature in each. They were rats. In your case, said O'Brien, the worst thing in the world happens to be rats. A sort of premonitory tremor. Oh, we have to look up that word premonitory. These are words. You don't have to worry about learning words like this. They're not common words. Let's see. Premonitory. Let's see. Premonitory. Giving you the feeling that something is going to happen, especially... Oh, so it comes from the word premonition. Premonition is like when you predict something, or you have a feeling that something is going to happen. That's a premonition. So this is just another form of that word, premonitory, but don't use it. It's not a very common thing. Premonition is actually a common word, but not. I don't think premonitory is. So a premonitory tremor. Tremor is like when you move, quick movements of your body, or quick movements of anything really. So he's already anticipating something bad is going to happen with the rats, and he shakes a little bit because he knows what's coming. That's what they mean by a sort of premonitory tremor. A fear of he was not certain what had passed through Winston as soon as he caught his first glimpse of the cage. A glimpse is a quick look. But at this moment, the meaning of the mask-like attachment in front of it suddenly sank into him. His bowels seemed to turn to water. The bowels are your digestive system. So his bowels, he was feeling so nervous and scared and anxious. His bowels sort of felt like, what did they say? At this moment, the meaning of the mask-like attachment in front of it suddenly sank into him. His bowels seemed to turn to water. So it felt like his insides had turned to water. He was so nervous and scared. "You can't do that," he cried out in a high, cracked voice. You couldn't, it's impossible." "Do you remember," said O'Brien, "the moment of panic that used to occur in your dreams? There was a wall of blackness in front of you, and a roaring sound in your ears. There was something terrible on the other side of the wall. You knew what it was, but you dared not drag it into the open. It was the rats that were on the other side of the wall." "O'Brien," said Winston, making an effort to control his voice, "you know that this is not necessary. What is it that you want me to do?" O'Brien made no direct answer. When he spoke, it was in the schoolmasterish manner that he sometimes affected. He looked thoughtfully into the distance, as though he were addressing an audience somewhere behind Winston's back. "By itself," he said, "pain is not always enough. There are occasions when a human being will stand out against pain, even to the point of death. But for everyone there is something unendurable. To endure something means it's difficult, but you can survive it. If you endure something, it means it's not easy, but you can manage it. If something is unendurable, it means it's too horrible, too difficult to survive, too difficult to tolerate. But for everyone, there's something unendurable, something that cannot be contemplated. Courage and cowardice are not involved. If you're falling from a height, it is not cowardly to clutch at a rope." Clutching is this. "If you have come up from the deep water, it is not cowardly to fill your lungs with air. It's merely an instinct which cannot be destroyed. It is the same with rats. For you, they are unendurable. That means you cannot survive it. It's too much for you to handle. They are a form of pressure that you cannot withstand. To withstand something, again, that kind of means like to tolerate something. Even if you wish to, you will do what is required of you. But what is it? What is it? How can I do it if I don't know what it is? O'Brien picked up the cage and brought it across to the nearer table. He set it down carefully on the baize cloth. Winston could hear the blood singing in his ears. He had the feeling of sitting in utter loneliness. He was in the middle of a great empty plain, a flat desert drenched with sunlight, across which all sounds came to him out of immense distances. Yet the cage with the rats was not 2 meters away from him. They were enormous rats. They were at the age when rats' muzzle grows blunt and fierce, and his fur brown and gray instead of gray. Oh, Antonio Montana says hello, and Still Waters also says hello. Hi, thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us. We're finishing. This is the final chapter. We're almost done. A muzzle is the part of an animal that sticks out like this. This is the muzzle, this part of the animal. So let's read that part about the rats again, where they mention muzzle. Where did it go? They were enormous rats. They were at the stage when a rat's muzzle grows blunt. Remember, blunt is like the opposite of sharp. So a blunt, we better look at a picture of that. Oh, unfortunately, blunt means more than one thing. Let's see if I put blunt object. That's better. Okay. Do you see the shape of this hammer? That's a blunt hammer. What other kind of things do they show for blunt? A lot of tools. But it's kind of like the opposite of sharp. You can see this knife here. This is called a cleaver. But it's old, so if you try to chop something with it, you can't because it's not sharp anymore. And the word that you could use here is blunt, because that's the opposite of sharp. The cleaver, the knife, is blunt. It can't cut anything. And if you think about the shape of an animal's face, like the nose part, the muzzle part, it's blunt. It's not sharp, it's not pointy, it's blunt. The rat, said O'Brien, still addressing his invisible audience, although a rodent is carnivorous. Carnivorous means only eats meat. So it's kind of the opposite of a vegetarian or a vegan. Carnivorous means only eats meat. You are aware of that. You will have heard of the things that happen in the poor quarters of this town. In some streets, a woman dare not leave her baby alone in the house, even for 5 minutes. The rats are certain to attack it. With quite a small time, they will strip it to the bones. They'll also attack sick or dying people. They show astonishing intelligence in knowing when a human being is helpless. There was an outburst of squeals from the cage. Squeal is like the sound of a pig. You know, the pig, when a pig makes, if you've never heard a pig goes, wee, wee, wee. That's a squeal. And so the sound of the mouse could also be, I would say it's a squeak, but, you could say squeal also. So there were outbursts of squeals from the cage, so you can hear the mice going, mee, 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 mee. It seemed to reach Winston from far away. The rats were fighting. They were trying to get at each other through the partition. He heard also a deep groan of despair. That, too, seemed to come from outside of himself. A groan is like, that's groaning. But this was a groan of despair. Despair is like extreme helplessness or sadness. So probably it was something like, something like that. O'Brien picked up the cage, and as he did so, pressed something in it. There was a sharp click. Winston made a frantic effort to tear himself loose from the chair. It was hopeless. Every part of him, even his head, was held immovably. O'Brien moved the cage nearer. It was less than a meter from Winston's face. "I've pressed the first lever," said O'Brien. "You understand the construction of this cage? The mask will fit over your head, leaving no exit. When I press this other lever, the door of the cage will slide up. These starving brutes will shoot out like bullets. Have you ever seen a rat leap through the air? Leaping is like a big jump. So have you ever seen a rat leap through the air, jump through the air, like flying almost? They will leap onto your face and bore straight through it." Bore is like make your way through something. Like if you're making a tunnel, they say boring a tunnel because that's what you have to do. You kind of have to dig and make room. So like a mouse could bore through the wall. They make a hole in the wall by doing this. Let's see, how are they using it here? They will leap onto your face and bore straight into it. So they'll make a hole and go in. Sometimes they attack the eyes first. Sometimes they burrow through the cheeks. So burrow is actually like moving your way through the tunnel or making the tunnel. Bore and burrow, I think they might even be related words, actually. They sound similar. So they burrow through the cheeks and devour the tongue. Devour means eat in a very aggressive way. Oh, Stillwater says, "Speaking of meter, may I know how do you say kilometer?" Some people say kilometer, and some people say kilometer. So you have a choice. You can say which. I say kilometer. That's how I would say it. But it's okay if you want to say kilometer. That's fine. I think most people say kilometer, but I don't know. Because I'm from the US and we don't even use the metric system. The cage was nearer. It was closing in. Winston heard a succession of shrill cries which appear to be occurring in the air above his head. Now, shrill, that's kind of an interesting word. I wonder what happens, what kind of pictures we can get if we look at the word shrill. Oh no, it's the name of a TV show or something, so you just see pictures of a stupid TV show. Here, let me show you a picture. Okay, now I don't know how old any of you are, but I don't know if they still have this in school. You know, the blackboard, do they still do that, or do they just use computers now? I don't know. But before, when I was young, they had the blackboard. And if you put your nails on the blackboard and you do this, that makes a horrible sound. Well, Antonio Montana says 28, but you're from Turkey, right? I think you said you're in Turkey. Do they use blackboards in Turkey like this? Do you know what that sound is like? Do you know what that does to you? It gives you a horrible feeling, and that's a shrill. That's what shrill means. It's usually a sound. It's a sound that somebody makes that gives you that feeling, that horrible feeling. Still Waters is in Taiwan. Have you had experiences with blackboards? Do you know what that sound is like? That's a horrible sound. Actually, I know. Let me show you another picture. I remember when I was growing up that my brother hated the sound of styrofoam rubbing together. So if I wanted to annoy him, I could rub the two pieces of styrofoam together, and he would get really angry because it gave him a horrible feeling. That sound gives him a horrible feeling. That's a shrill sound to him. All right, so I think we understand the word shrill. Let's see. So the cage was nearer. It was closing in. Winston heard a succession of shrill cries, which appeared to be occurring in the air above his head. So maybe the rats were making noise as they were getting closer, and it was giving him that feeling. Which one do you hate, Still Waters? Do you hate the chalkboard or the styrofoam? Or both? Let's see. But he fought furiously against his panic. To think even with a split second left, to think was the only hope. Suddenly, the foul, musty odor of the brutes struck his nostrils. These are your nostrils, this part of your nose right here. And foul means disgusting, like horrible and disgusting. And musty is like the, let's see. Let me find a picture. Here's a picture to look at. Now this is mold. The black that you see on the wall is mold. And if you've ever been in a room where there's a lot of this, there's a smell. It's like the smell of mold. And that is a musty smell. That's what musty means. If something is musty, it smells like this, like the mold. All right, I think we have to reread that sentence. Let's go back. Suddenly, the foul, musty odor, that's a smell. Odor is smell. So the disgusting, moldy smell of the brutes, that's referring to the rats, struck his nostrils. So that came into his nostrils. These are your nostrils. There was a violent convulsion of nausea inside of him. A convulsion is when you do this. That's a convulsion. So there was a, let's see, how did they say it? There was a violent convulsion of nausea. Nausea means you have to vomit. So actually that was coming from his stomach. His stomach moved. His stomach jumped up like he was going to throw up, like he was going to vomit. And he almost lost consciousness. Everything had gone black. Yet he came out of the blackness clutching an idea. Clutching is when you grab something very tight. Yet he came out of the blackness clutching an idea. There was one and only one way to save himself. He must interpose another human being, the body of another human being, between himself and the rats. The circle of the mask was large enough now to shut out the vision of anything else. The wire door was a couple of hand spans from his face. A span is like a range. So when it says that the wire door was a couple of hand spans from his face, maybe it means like two hands. Like this was the distance of the cage. One of them was leaping up and down. Leaping is like jumping, but it's a much bigger jump. It's almost like flying. The other, an old, scaly grandfather of the sewers, scaly. Let's look at that word, scales. Oh. It's kind of the texture of like a fish. Do you know, actually, let's take a look at fish scales. Also of a snake. I don't know if a snake has scales because, well, I don't know. But these are scales. So, like on a fish has scales. Before you eat the fish, you have to take off the scales. You have to descale the fish. He's describing the rat as scaly. So what I'm thinking is that the rat is so dirty that, like, the pieces of the fur are are organized like scales because the hair is so greasy and dirty that it's not like clean hair, but like maybe in little points. Okay, one of them leaping up and down, and the other an old scaly grandfather of the sewers. In case you don't know what sewers are, I guess we better take a look. Sewers are the place under the city where the dirty water goes. These are sewers. So it seems like that rat, he says, an old scaly grandfather of the sewers, stood up with his pink hands against the bars and fiercely sniffed the air. Winston could see the whiskers. Whiskers are the hairs of the face. So if you have a mustache, those are whiskers, or if you have a beard, those are whiskers. But on animals, the whiskers are the very thick hairs that come out from the cheeks. Winston could see the whiskers and the yellow teeth. Again, the black panic took hold of him. He was blind, helpless, mindless. It was a common punishment in Imperial China, said O'Brien, as didactically as ever. The mask was closing on his face. The wire brushed his cheek. And then? No. It was not relief, only hope, a tiny fragment of hope. Fragment means like a little piece. Too late, perhaps, too late, but he had suddenly understood that in the whole world there was just one person to whom he could transfer his punishment. One body that he could thrust. Thrust means push very, very quickly, very hard. Between himself and the rats. And he was shouting frantically over and over, "Do it to Julia! Do it to Julia, not me, Julia! I don't care what you do to her. Tear off her face, strip her to the bones. Not me, Julia, not me." He was falling backwards into enormous depths away from the rats. He was still trapped in the chair. He was still strapped in the chair, but he had fallen through the floor, through the walls of the building, through the earth, through the oceans, through the atmosphere, into outer space, into the gulfs between the stars, always away, away, away from the rats. He was light years distant, but O'Brien was still standing at his side. There was still the cold touch of wire against his cheek, but through the darkness that enveloped him he heard another metallic click, and he knew that the cage door had clicked shut and not opened. Okay, I made a mistake. There's another chapter, but we're going to read it. So these are the final 3 chapters of part 3. Now we have to do chapter 6. So I'm definitely going to read it. I think it's maybe like 10 pages, I guess, not very long. But before we do that, I'm just going to take a little break. Just 1 minute, and I'll be right back, okay? Okay, thanks for waiting. Still Waters says native speakers use this phrasal verb, take off the fish scales. Uh, I'm just thinking, because remove the fish scales, take off the fish scales. You could say either one. I think most people would say remove, but I'm not really sure why. In this instance, take off is very common, and it means remove, but I think because, maybe because the scales are permanently attached, you use the word remove. And when you say take off, it sounds like something that's easy to move. But that's not a rule. I think that's just, in this case, that's probably the difference. A lot of times, you can use them interchangeably, but I just think that a lot of times if you're saying remove, it's because it's something permanently attached. But that's not a rule. You can use remove for temporary things, and you can use take off for permanent things. But I think in general, that might be the difference. All right, so chapter 6. This really is the end, because I think there are only like 375 pages or something, and we're on 363. So there can't be any more chapters. All right. Oh, Winston betrayed his girlfriend and said, do it to Julia instead. Oh, no. The chestnut tree was almost empty. A ray of sunlight slanting through a window fell on dusty tabletops. It was the lonely half hour of 15. A tinny music trickled from the telescreens. What chestnut tree is he talking about? When something is slanted, it goes in this direction. It goes at an angle. So when it says a ray of sunlight slanted through the window, when you look in the window, sometimes you can see the rays, the little bars of sunlight. Those are called rays. And they go at an angle. They slant. Tin, by the way, because it says tinny music, tin is a material. Maybe you know aluminum. If you don't know tin, you probably know aluminum. So, for example, it's a material for cans like this. So this is an aluminum can. But another way of saying that is tin. It's a tin can. When they say tinny music, sometimes, especially, I don't know about now, but a long time ago, if you were playing the radio, sometimes it would sound like the music or the sound was coming from a tin can because there's like a little echo. And we say that sounds tinny. And so you can imagine that there's sound coming from the telescreen, but it isn't very good quality. It sounds like they're talking into a can. That's what they mean by tinny. A tinny music trickled from the telescreens. Winston sat in his usual corner. Why is he talking about a chestnut tree? There are no windows, so how does he know about chestnut trees? That's strange. I don't understand that. And why is there a window? This is strange. Okay, maybe he's in a different place. Winston sat in his usual corner, gazing into an empty glass. To gaze at something means to look at something and concentrate on something. So he's got an empty glass and he's just looking at it with a lot of concentration. Now and again he glanced up at a vast face which eyed him from the opposite wall. Big Brother is watching you, the caption said. Unbidden, a waiter came and filled his glass up with Victory Gin. To bid something is to request something, to ask for something. So when it says unbidden, that means he didn't ask for it. So a waiter just came in and poured a glass for him. He didn't have to ask for it. It just happened. Unbidden, a waiter came and filled up his glass with Victory Gin, shaking into it a few drops from another bottle with a quill through the cork. It was saccharine flavored with cloves and a specialty of the cafe. Winston was listening to the telescreen. At present, only music was coming out of it, but there was a possibility that at any moment there might be a special bulletin from the Ministry of Peace. The news from the African front was disquieting in the extreme. Disquieting means makes you feel nervous or uncomfortable. So the news from the African front, when you're talking about a war and where the war is happening, you call that a front. So when it says the news from the African front, we understand there's a war, and there's a place in Africa where that war is happening, and that line where the two armies are meeting, that's called the front. So the news from the African front was disquieting in the extreme, made you feel nervous, made you feel uncomfortable, made you feel not good. That's disquieting. On and off, he had been worrying about it all day. A Eurasian army, Oceania was at war with Eurasia, Oceania had always been at war with Eurasia, was moving southward at a terrifying speed. The midday bulletin had not mentioned any definite area, but it was probable that already the mouth of the Congo was a battlefield. Brazzaville and Leopoldville were in danger. One did not have to look at the map to see what it meant. It was not merely a question of losing Central Africa for the first time in the whole war. The territory of Oceania itself was menaced. A violent emotion, not fear exactly, but a sort of undifferentiated excitement. If you differentiate something, it means you can separate them clearly. You can see them both clearly. So if something is undifferentiated, that means you can't really see the 2 or 3 or 4 things clearly. They all seem to be mixed together somehow. Let's see, what was undifferentiated here? A violent emotion, not far exactly, but a sort of undifferentiated excitement. So he was feeling excitement, but not sure if it was like a nervous excitement or a happy excitement. It wasn't clear. It was a type of excitement, but it wasn't clear if it was good or bad, probably. Flared up in him and then faded again. He stopped thinking about the war. In these days, he could never fix his mind on any one subject for more than a few moments at a time. He picked up his glass and drained it at a gulp. To drain something is to empty all of the liquid. So if he drained the glass, I picture him taking the glass and just drinking it very quickly, draining the glass, emptying all the liquid out of the glass. And a gulp, this is a gulp. A gulp is a sound. This is a sound you make with your throat if you're drinking something. That's really the gulp. That's a gulp. So if he drained the glass in one gulp, it just means he put it in his mouth and it went straight down. That's actually a pretty common expression, to drink something in a gulp, or to gulp something down means to drink it very, very quickly. He picked up his glass and drained it at a gulp. As always, the gin made him shudder. Shudder is this. And even retch slightly. Retch is... So he drank the gin and then he went... And then he retched. The stuff was horrible. The cloves and the saccharin themselves, disgusting enough in their sickly way, could not disguise the flat, oily smell. And what was worst of all was that the smell of gin, which dwelt with him night and day, was inextricably mixed up in his mind with the smell of those... He never named them, even in his thoughts, And so far as it was possible, he never visualized something. To visualize something is to imagine something in your head, to try to imagine a picture in your head. They were something that he was half aware of, hovering close to his face, the smell that clung to his nostrils. As the gin rose in him, he belched through purple lips. Belches. That's belching. He had grown fatter since they released him, and he had regained his old color, indeed. More than regained it, his features had thickened. The skin on the nose and the cheekbones was coarsely red. Even the bald scalp was too deep a pink. A waiter again, unbidden. Remember, that means he didn't ask for it. It just happened. He didn't request it. A waiter again, unbidden. It's not a common word, though. I don't think that you should try using that in regular conversation. Brought the chessboard and the current issue of The Times. With the page turned down at the chess problem, then, seeing that Winston's glass was empty, he brought the gin bottle and filled it. There was no need to give orders. They knew his habits. The chessboard was always waiting for him, his corner table always reserved. Even when the place was full, he had it to himself, since nobody cared to be seen sitting too close to him. He never even bothered to count his drinks. At irregular intervals, they presented him with a dirty slip of paper. Remember, a slip of paper is just a very small piece of paper. They presented him with a dirty slip of paper, which they said was the bill, but he had the impression that they always undercharged him. It would have made no difference if it had been the other way about. He had always plenty of money nowadays. He even had a job, a sinecure, more highly paid than his old job had been. I don't know what that means, sinecure. I don't even know if I'm saying that correctly. I've never seen that word before. Sinecure. It seems like I've looked it up before because sinecure, a position requiring little or no work but giving the holder status or financial benefit. Oh, so he works for the government? Probably. Yeah, and that's the correct pronunciation, sinecure. The music from the telescreen stopped, and a voice took over. Winston raised his head to listen. No bulletins from the front, however. It was merely a brief announcement from the Ministry of Plenty. In the preceding quarter, it appeared that the 10th three-year plan's quota for bootlaces had been overfulfilled by 98%. He examined the chess problem and set out the pieces. It was a tricky ending involving a couple of knights. White to play and mate in 2 moves. Winston looked up at the portrait of Big Brother. White always mates, he thought, with a sort of cloudy mysticism. Always, without exception, it is so arranged. In no chess problem since the beginning of the world has black ever won. Did it not symbolize the eternal, unvarying triumph of good over evil? The huge face gazed back at him, full of calm power. White always mates. The voice from the telescreen paused and added in a different and much graver tone, "You are warned to stand by for an important announcement at 15:30. 15:30. This is news of the highest importance. Take care not to miss it. 15:30. The tinkling music struck up again. And that word tinkle, imagine if you take 2 wine glasses and you do a toast, you put the 2 glasses together, that sound is a tinkle. Winston's heart stirred. That was the bulletin from the front, instinct told him, that it was bad news and that was coming. All day with little spurts of excitement. Spurts are like little explosions. Very small explosions. Oh, I just want to check, make sure, because I can think of when it wouldn't be small. Gush out in a sudden forceful stream, move with a sudden burst of speed, a sudden gushing stream. Okay, so what it really means is like a sudden, kind of like an explosion of liquid. So, if I do this to my wrist, blood will spurt out. But you can say like a spurt of energy is like a very short, but explosion. I still think it means like explosion. I'm going to say it. Okay, but it could be big. It could seem big. So I shouldn't have said that it was small. All day, with little spurts of excitement, the thought of smashing defeat in Africa had been in and out of his mind. He seemed actually to see the Eurasian army swarming across the never-broken frontier and pouring down the tip of Africa like a column of ants. Every time I see that word swarm, I insist on playing my little video about swarm, because nobody ever views that. I never get any views on that video, but I like that video, so I'm going to make you watch it now, since nobody watches it on YouTube or on TikTok. Wait, where is it? I can't even find it now. I have to clean up my desktop. Where's Swarm? Oh no, I can't. Oh, here it is. Let's take a look. The word swarm is used to describe a group of insects. It's like a cloud of insects. Obviously, this is not a good thing. You can use swarm to talk about large groups of people in a negative way. It can be used as a noun, a swarm of people, or a verb. Let's practice using it as a verb. Okay, well, you get the idea of swarm from that. So that's what you use to talk about like armies of insects. But you can talk about it using it with people, like large groups of people coming in at once, like a swarm of people entering the metro. Maybe you could picture something like that. So it's used in a negative way. Too many people coming at one time, like insects. Okay. All day, with little spurts of excitement, the thought of smashing defeat in Africa had been in and out of his mind. He seemed actually to see the Eurasian army swarming across the never-broken frontier and pouring down the tip of Africa like a column of ants. He even makes an insect reference here, talking about ants. Why had it not been possible to outflank them in some way? The outline of the West African coast stood out vividly in his mind. Vivid means very clearly. He picked up the white knight and moved it across the board. There was the proper spot. Even while he saw the black horde racing southward, he saw another force mysteriously assembled, suddenly planted in the rear, cutting their communications by land and sea. He felt that by willing it, he was bringing that other force into existence. But it was necessary to act quickly. If they could get control of the whole of Africa, if they had airfields and submarine bases at the Cape, it would cut Oceania in two. It might mean anything: defeat, breakdown, and redivision of the world, the destruction of the party. He drew a deep breath, an extraordinary medley of feeling. A medley is when things come together and work together. So an extraordinary medley of feeling, that means a lot of different feelings coming together to create one thing. But it was not a medley exactly. Rather, it was a successive layer of feelings. in which one could not say which layer was undermost, struggled inside him. The spasm passed. A spasm is like an involuntary movement. Did you ever, in the spring, like if you have allergies, maybe your eye moves for no reason, your eyelid moves like that? Does that ever happen to you? Or sometimes if you're sick, your nose can do that. It just kind of moves. Those are spasms. He put the white knight back in its place, but for the moment he could not settle down to serious study of the chess problem. His thoughts wandered again, almost unconsciously. He traced with his finger in the dust on the table. So to trace something is to follow a line. So I think he was actually making lines on the table with the dust. I think that's what he's doing. They can't get inside you, she had said, but they could get inside you. What happens to you here is forever, O'Brien had said. That was a true word. There were things, your own acts. There were things, your own acts, from which you could never recover. Something was killed in your breast. This is the breast, so that's where your heart is. Something was killed in your breast, burnt out, cauterized out. He had seen her. He had even spoken to her. There was no danger in it. He knew as though instinctively that they now took almost no interest in his doings. He could have arranged to meet her a second time, if either of them had wanted to. Actually, it was by chance that they had met. It was in the park, on a vile, biting day in March. Vile means horrible. Stillwater says, a swarm of people, flies, uses swarm as a negative way, right? I learned a lot from you. Thank you for your compliment, Stillwaters. Yes, it's always bad. When you talk about a swarm of something, it's too many of them, you don't like it. Just always think about the insects, because that's when you see all of the mosquitoes in a big cloud, that's a swarm of mosquitoes. That's not something nice. So if you talk about a swarm of people, it's just like that. You hate it. It's there. But you can't do anything. Oh, we've got Hadi is here. Hi Hadi, how are you doing today? We're finishing the book finally. We're on the last few pages, actually. Then we'll have to start a new book. Okay, it was in the park on a vile means horrible, disgusting, rotten, biting day in March, when the earth was like iron, and all the grass seemed dead, and there was not a bud anywhere except a few crocuses which had pushed themselves up to be dismembered by the wind. Dismembered means like cut. Actually, when you talk about dismember, I don't know if you know the word amputate, but you could use the word dismember instead of amputate. So if they have to take your arm, they amputate your arm, you could use dismember, but I think usually dismember is by accident. So if the let's see, which had themselves up to be dismembered by the wind, I better show you what a bud is. It's like an immature flower. It's like a baby flower. Here's a bud. That's a flower bud. So it's a flower before it matures. Hadi says dismember, sever. Yeah, it's the same thing. Dismember, sever. But I think when you say dismember, I don't know, it sounds like some kind of accident happened. That's usually when you use dismember is for some kind of unintentional accident, I think. But it just means like the two things get disconnected, get cut. So let's reread that. So when the earth was like iron and all the grass seemed dead, and there was not a bud anywhere except a few crocuses, that's a type of flower, which had pushed themselves up to be dismembered by the wind. He was hurrying along with frozen hands and watering eyes when he saw her, not 10 meters away from him. It struck him at once that she had changed in some ill-defined way. When you define something, you say what it is. You say exactly what it is. If something is ill-defined, that means it isn't clear. The definition isn't clear. So she had changed in some ill-defined way means she changed, but he couldn't, if you asked him, how did she change? He couldn't answer you. He couldn't say, I don't know, there was just something different about her. So she changed in an ill-defined way. You can't explain it because it isn't clear. Hadi says nip in the bud, and nip could mean like a little cut. And, imagine if you, the bud is like the baby flower. So if you nip it in the bud, you're stopping it before it grows. So what nip in the bud means, it means stop it before it gets worse. So, imagine if you have a child who's always acting very badly. If you don't correct it now when they're a child, maybe they'll grow up to be a very bad adult. So you have to nip it in the bud. You have to stop that before it gets worse. That's what nip in the bud means. They almost passed one another without a sign, and then he turned and followed her, not very eagerly. He knew that she was no danger. Nobody would take any interest in him. She did not speak. She walked obliquely away across the grass, as though trying to get rid of him. So I think they're talking about Julia. They haven't mentioned her name, but he saw her in the park, and they saw each other. And Winston started following her, but it seemed like she didn't want to talk to him. Then seemed to resign herself to having him at her side. Presently, they were in among a clump of ragged, leafless shrubs, useless either for concealment or protection from the wind. They halted. Halted just means stop. It was vilely cold. Remember, vilely means horrible, disgusting. It's a very strong word, vile. The wind whistled through the twigs. When wind is whistling, whistling is... So when the wind is going... That's the wind whistling. The wind whistled through the twigs and fetid the occasional dirty-looking crocuses. He put his arm around her waist. There was no telescreen, but there must be hidden microphones. Besides, they could be seen. It did not matter. Nothing mattered. They could have lain down on the ground and done that if they had wanted to. His flesh froze with horror at the thought of it. She made no response whatever to the clasp of his arm. She did not even try to disengage herself. Engage means connect. So disengage means disconnect. He knew now what had changed in her. Her face was sallower. Okay, we have to look up that word sallow. This is not really like a vocabulary word that you need to know. Unhealthy, yellow, pale brown color. So her face didn't have any color. It had color, but it was an unhealthy color. It was kind of yellowish. And there was a long scar, partly hidden by her hair, across her forehead and temple. This is the temple here. And this is the forehead. So you've got the forehead in the front, and these are the temples. But that was not the change. It was not that, it was that her waist had grown thicker, and in a surprising way had stiffened. He remembered how once after the explosion of a rocket bomb, he had helped to drag a corpse out of some ruins, and had been astonished not only by the incredible weight of the thing, but by its rigidity. Rigidity means can't move, can't bend. So he was surprised when a corpse is a dead body, so he was moving a dead body out of a pile of fallen building, and he was very surprised at how stiff the body was, that it was very rigid. It didn't move. You couldn't bend the arms or the legs. And awkwardness to handle, which made it seem more like stone than flesh. Her body felt like that. It occurred to him that the texture of her skin would be quite different from what it had once been. He did not attempt to kiss her, nor did they speak. As they walked back across the grass, she looked directly at him for the first time. It was only a momentary glance, full of contempt and dislike. Contempt means hate. So when she did look at him, she looked at him with hate. I hate you. That's contempt. He wondered whether it was a dislike that came purely out of the past, or whether it was inspired also by his bloated face and the water that the wind kept squeezing from his eyes. They sat down on two iron chairs side by side, but not too close together. He saw that she was about to speak. She moved her clumsy shoe a few centimeters and deliberately crushed a twig. Her feet seemed to have grown broader. He noticed. "I betrayed you," she said boldly. "I betrayed you," he said. She gave him another quick look of dislike. Hadi is asking, what do we call the growth of hair on the temple near your ears? Do you mean like here? Can you see where? Do you mean this? I don't know if there's a name for that, if that's what you're talking about, like here. Let's see. I've never thought about it. Let's see. Let's ask Google. What is hair on temple called? It's called the temporal area. So there's no name. I don't think there's any name for the hair, but you can call it the temporal area. Sometimes, she said, they threaten you with something you can't stand up to. To stand up to something is to protest something. So when you stand up to someone, you're saying, no, stop it. That's enough. I won't do this anymore. That's standing up to something or someone. You stand up to a bully. So if a bully is giving you a problem, you say, I'm not afraid of you. That's standing up to a bully. Let's see, how does she use it here? She says, sometimes, she said, they threaten you with something you can't stand up to. So they threaten you with something that you're too afraid to protest. Can't even think about. And then you say, don't do it to me. Do it to somebody else. Do it to so-and-so. And perhaps, by the way, when you say so-and-so, it's a little bit rude. But it could be a way of, if you don't know somebody's name, I was talking to so-and-so, because you can't think of their name. You don't know what their name is. But I think it's rude. It's not very nice to do that. But here she's doing it because it doesn't matter whose name you put there. So, let's reread that. And then you say, don't do it to me, do it to somebody else. Do it to so-and-so. That could be anybody's name. Do it to Winston, do it to John, do it to Mike. Instead of saying a name, you just say so-and-so. It doesn't matter who. I don't care who. Just do it to somebody different. Do it to somebody else. Don't do it to me. Do it to so-and-so. And perhaps you might pretend afterwards that it was only a trick and that you just said it to make them stop and didn't really mean it. But that isn't true. At the time when it happens, you do mean it. You think there's no other way of saving yourself, and you're quite ready to save yourself that way. You want it to happen to the other person. You don't give a damn what they suffer. All you care about is yourself. All you care about is yourself, he echoed. And after that, you don't feel the same towards the other person any longer. No, he said, you don't feel the same. There did not seem to be anything more to say. The wind plastered their thin overalls against their bodies. Almost at once it became embarrassing to sit there in silence. Besides, it was too cold to keep still. She said something about catching her tube and stood up to go. And so in London, the subway is called the Tube. So she was saying, I have to go catch the train. We must meet again, he said. Yes, she said, we must meet again. He followed irresolutely for a little distant. To be resolute means that you have decided to do something and you're very confident about your decision. So when you say, I am resolute, that means I made up my mind and I'm not going to change it. I am resolute. But if you say irresolute, which is not really a common word, but what that means here is he was walking away, but he wasn't sure if he should walk away. He was kind of hesitating because, well, who knows why. It's a very weird situation that they're in. But he wasn't walking away confidently, almost like maybe he was looking back or maybe he was pausing or something like that. Oh, Hadi says, had something coming to us. Was that in here? Did they say that? I don't remember reading that. Okay, well, that's a good question. If it's in there, I don't remember if I read that or not. But if you have something coming to you, it means you deserve it. It's something bad, and you deserve it. So imagine somebody robs a bank. Okay, he takes the money from the bank, and then he runs out into the street, and then a car hits him because he's not paying attention. He's trying to run away, and a car hits him. Would you say, oh, poor robber? No, you would say, good. He had it coming. That means he deserved it. I'm glad that bad thing happened to him. So when you say you had it coming, that means you deserve that bad thing that happened to you. That's a very common expression, by the way. I just don't remember. Was that actually in here? I don't remember reading it. Hadi says, I don't have any money and I don't have money on me. Is there a difference? Yes, there's a big difference. Because if you say, I don't have any money, that means I'm poor. But if you say, I don't have any money on me, it means I have money somewhere, but not with me. So imagine this situation. You go to have some coffee with a friend. And then when it comes time to pay, if you say, oh, do you mind paying this time because I don't have any money, that sounds like at the moment you're kind of poor. But if you say, I don't have any money on me, that just means I forgot to bring money with me. Does that make sense? Okay, so we've got, he followed irresolutely for a little distance, half a pace behind her. Pace means step. So he was very close behind her, actually. Just one step behind her. She did not actually try to shake him off. To shake someone off means like to try to make them leave, make them go away. Like, stop following me, leave me alone. Shake someone off. But walked just at such a speed as to prevent his keeping abreast of her. Abreast means like at the same level, at the same pace. So if they're abreast, they're even. They're walking side by side. Let's see. Let's read that again. She did not actually try to shake him off. So she didn't say, go away, leave me alone. But walked at just such a speed as to prevent his keeping abreast of her. So she tried walking faster so that he couldn't walk side by side with her. He had made up his mind that he would accompany her as far as the tube station. But suddenly this process of trailing along So trailing along or trailing behind means being behind, like not maintaining the same level. So you could even use that like at school. I'm trailing behind my class. I would say falling behind, but you could say trailing behind, which means everybody else is ahead of me, is in front of me, and I'm here. I have to do something. I have to work harder. I have to walk faster. I have to study more to go back to their level. But here it's literal. Here she's walking and he's trailing behind. Oh, actually, trailing along. In the cold seemed pointless and unbearable. Same thing, trailing along. It just means he's following her from a distance. He was overwhelmed by a desire, not so much to get away from Julia as to back to the Chestnut Tree Cafe, which had never seemed so attractive as at this moment. He had a nostalgic vision of his corner table with the newspaper and the chessboard and the ever-flowing gin. So flowing is the movement of water, but ever-flowing means always flowing. They're always giving him more gin. That's what it means. It's like a bottomless cup. They always give him more. Above all, it would be warm in there. The next moment, not altogether by accident, he allowed himself to become separated from her by a small knot of people. He made a half-hearted attempt to catch up. Half-hearted means insincere. Don't really mean it. So he tried a little bit to catch up, but he didn't really want to. He just made it look that way. Hadi says, it means I just forget my money, my wallet. I forgot to bring my wallet with me. Yeah, if you say I don't have money on me, that means you forgot your wallet, in your case. When he had gone 50 meters, he looked back, and the street was not crowded, but already he could not distinguish her. Any one of a dozen hurrying figures might have been hers. Perhaps her thickened, stiffened body was no longer recognizable from behind. At the time when it happened, she said, "You do mean it." He had meant it. He had not merely said it, he had wished it. He had wished that she and not he should be delivered over to the... Something changed in the music that trickled from the telescreen. Let's take a look at that word trickle. Let's see if we can find a picture of a trickle. Oh, that's not a very good trickle. Maybe this. All right, let me show you this picture. Trickle is used to talk about just a little bit of water coming out, or just a little bit of liquid coming out. This is trickling water. It's not a lot. It's just a little bit. That's a trickle. And you can use it like people trickled into the movie theater. So that means it wasn't like remember we talked about the word swarm earlier? It wasn't a swarm of people going into the movie theater. It was like one person and then another person and then another person, very slowly, not a big volume. How's business? Well, we've had a trickle of customers. That means one or here, one customer here, one customer there, but not too many, not a lot. Little by little, that's a trickle. Mostly used to talk about liquid, but you can use it in other ways. What was trickling here? I don't remember. Oh, so something changed in the music that trickled from the telescreen. So maybe what they're saying is, because remember earlier they said it was tinny music. So maybe when he's using trickle here, he's talking about that sound. You know, if you tune an old radio, and maybe you could kind of imagine how that would sound like the water, very slow water moving into other water. That's a trickle sound. Let's see. Hadi says, my shoes are dirty and I'm carrying mud into the house, tracking mud in the house, which is right. Oh, tracking. Tracking mud, not carrying mud. You would definitely say tracking there. A cracked and jeering note, a yellow note came into it, and then perhaps it was not happening, perhaps it was only a memory taking on the semblance of a sound. A voice was singing, under the spreading chestnut tree, I sold you and you sold me. The tears welled up in his eyes. A passing waiter noticed that his glass was empty and came back with the gin bottle. He took up his glass and sniffed it. The stuff grew not less but more horrible with every mouthful he drank. But it had become the element he swam in. It was his life, his death, his resurrection. It was gin that sank him into a stupor every night. A stupor is when you're kind of in the middle of being awake and being asleep. So when you wake up, if you're not 100% awake, you're kind of in a stupor. If you drink a lot of alcohol, you can be in a drunken stupor. Like you're awake, but you're not really there. That's a stupor. I think it's related to the word stupid. I might be wrong about that, but it could be. Because if you're in a stupor, you don't know what's happening around you. It was gin that sank him into a stupor every night, and gin that received him every morning. When he woke, seldom before 1100, with gummed up eyelids and fiery mouth and a back that seemed to be broken, it would have been impossible even to rise from the horizontal if it had not been for the bottle and teacup placed beside the bed overnight. Through the midday hours, he sat with a glazed face. Well, that's kind of an interesting word. Let's see. Let's take a look. Glaze is used a lot to talk about sugary things. Let me show you a picture of glazed versus non-glazed. If we're talking about not just sugary things, you can talk about meat in this way. Sometimes meat is glazed. The donut on the right, the shiny one, that's a glazed donut. And the donut on the left that doesn't have the white on it, that's non-glazed. Glazed means like shiny. Let's see what happens if we because I put glazed donut, but if we look at just the word glazed, oh, they only show donuts. Glazed could mean like if you apply something on what. Let's see. What if I put glazed wood? See, this person. There's a special word for this, but you could technically say that it's glazed or glazed pottery. All right. Let's see if we can get a comparison. Okay, so if you look at these ones, the ones on the left are not glazed, but the ones on the right, which are shiny, those are glazed. Okay, but that's not really how they're using glaze here. That's just what glaze means. But when you have an expression on your face, which is no expression like this, that's a glazed expression. I don't know why, but that's what it's called. Kind of looking stupid. That's a glazed expression, and that's what they're talking about here. Through the midday hours, he sat with a glazed face. So you can picture him sitting at the table like this. Nothing is happening inside his brain. And a bottle handy. Listening to the telescreen. From 15 to closing time, he was a fixture at the Chestnut. If you are a fixture at a place, that means you're always there. They always see you there. So he was always at the Chestnut. You could always find him there. No one cared what he did any longer. No whistle woke him, no telescreen admonished him. Occasionally, perhaps twice a week, he went to a dusty, forgotten-looking office in the Ministry of Truth and did a little work, or what was called work. He had been appointed to a subcommittee of a subcommittee, which had sprouted from one of the innumerable committees dealing with minor difficulties that arose in the complication of the 11th edition of Newspeak. I think that's intentionally confusing, because what he's saying is they gave him a very useless job. Hadi says, trickle in slowly and gradually. That's what it means, especially if you're talking about if you're using it to talk about people. But then when I think of trickle and water, I especially think of the sound. Like, imagine a very small fountain. That sound that you would hear from a very small, like, table fountain. That would be a trickle of water. Hadi says drunken stupor. Yes, stupor is like the being in between sleeping and waking, and you don't really know what's happening around you. You're in a very strange state. It could be a drug stupor, it could be a drunken stupor, but also sometimes if you're really tired and you have to wake up early, there might be 5 minutes after you wake up where you're kind of in a stupor, like, what's going on? Okay. They were engaged in producing something called an interim report. But it was that they were reporting... Wait, let me read that again. But what it was that they were reporting on, he had never definitely found out. It was something to do with the question of whether commas should be placed inside brackets or outside. And there were 4 others on the committee. So imagine there's a whole committee, group of people, and all they're talking about is, how should we do the comma? So it's just work, but they weren't really producing anything. It's busy work. You call that busy work. Busy work is when you give somebody work to do just to keep them busy so that they don't do anything else. Frankly, admitting to one another that there was not really anything to be done. Oh, wait. There were days when they assembled and then promptly dispersed again. Dispersed means go away. So they would meet and then they would say, forget it. We've got nothing to do. Frankly admitting to one another that there was nothing really anything to be done. But there were other days when they settled down to their work almost eagerly, making a tremendous show of entering up their minutes and drafting long memoranda, which were never finished. When the argument as to what they were supposedly arguing about grew extraordinarily involved and abstruse. Let's look up the meaning of that word, abstruse. Difficult to understand, obscure. When argument was supposedly arguing about grew extraordinarily involved and abstruse, difficult to understand and obscure, with subtle haggling over definitions. Haggling is when you argue about it's usually used if you're bargaining for something. How much is that? $10. I'll give you 5. No, I'm not taking 5. 9. I'll give you 9. No, I'm not paying $9. 7. That's haggling. But here they're not talking about money. They're haggling over the definition of something or the process of something. With subtle haggling over definitions, enormous digressions. Digression means changing the subject. Quarrels are fights. Threats, even to appeal to higher authority. And then suddenly the life would go out of them, and they would sit around the table looking at one another with extinct eyes, like ghosts fading at a cock crow. So again, that's like what was the word that we were using earlier? I forgot already. When remember Winston was sitting there with no look on his face, looking stupid. Same thing here. I forgot what word we were talking about. The telescreen was silent for a moment. Winston raised his head again. The bulletin. But no, they were merely changing the music. He had the map of Africa behind his eyelids. The movement of the armies was a diagram, a black arrow tearing vertically tearing down southward, and a white arrow horizontally eastward. Horizontal. This is horizontal that way. As though for reassurance, he looked up at the imperturbable face on the portrait. Perturb means you can't make it angry. So if something is imperturbable, it means, I think in this case, it just means you can't make the facial expression change. Hadi says intoxicated. Well, intoxicated means to be under the influence of something like alcohol or drugs, maybe. But the difference between stupor and intoxicated is that a stupor, first of all, it doesn't have to be about drugs or alcohol. Like I said, it could be about waking up. But a stupor, the emphasis is on you don't understand what's going around, what's happening around you, because you're in this strange place in your head that's somewhere between sleeping and being awake. And intoxicated just means you have something in your system that has changed your perceptions. As though for reassurance, he looked up at the imperturbable face of the portrait. Was it conceivable that a second arrow did not even exist? His interest flagged again. He drank another mouthful of gin, picked up the White Knight, and made a tentative move. Check. But it was evidently not the right move, because uncalled, a memory floated into his mind. He saw a candlelit room with a vast, white counterpaned bed, and himself, a boy of 9 or 10, sitting on the floor, shaking a dice box and laughing excitedly. His mother was sitting opposite him, also laughing. Hadi says, look busy doing nothing. You're talking about busy work? Busy work is kind of the opposite. It's kind of like a distraction for somebody. Like, imagine you have a child who is running around doing crazy things and you want them to stop. So you say, here, do this. I don't know what it could be. Like, oh. Wait, let's see. Oh, 50. Let me see if I can find a picture of something. Okay. Do you ever play with cards? There are 52 cards in a deck of cards. And sometimes as a joke, like when you're a child, you might take some other child's cards and throw them on the floor. Like, what you say, do you want to play 52 pickup? Yeah, what's that? And then you take the cards and you throw them and say, go pick them up. And it's 52 pickup because there are 52 cards in a deck. But so imagine there's a child acting crazy. So you say, here, let's play 52 pickup. You throw the cards. Now the child is busy doing something. And it's like a distraction, so they're not doing something else. That's busy work. Hadi says, haggle over the price. Yes, you haggle over the prices. I think you do that a lot in Pakistan, right? Always haggling over the price of something. It must have been about a month before she disappeared. It was a moment of reconciliation when the nagging hunger in his belly was forgotten, and his earlier affection for her had temporarily revived. Revived means come to life again. He remembered the day well, a pelting, drenching day when the water streamed down the window pane and the light indoors was too dull to read by. Pelting is throwing. So if you think about a pelting rain, that would be a rain making a lot of noise, like it's being thrown against the house. Like big, big raindrops. And drench means completely 100% wet. So when you hear pelting, you can hear the sound, boom, 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 of the rain. And drenching means everything was wet, 100%. Hadi says glazed extension. I'm not sure what that means. What are you talking about? I'm not sure how those two words are related. Uh, Now it's interesting because here we have, it says the water streamed down the window pane. So think about trickle. Trickle would be very slow and a little bit of water, and stream is almost the opposite. It's like a very steady line. Not necessarily a lot, but definitely very consistent. And a trickle is not very consistent. The boredom of the two children in the dark, cramped bedroom. Cramped means can't move, so the bedroom was very small, not easy to move around, not very much room in there. The cramped bedroom became unbearable. Winston whined and grizzled. Whining is, oh, that's whining. Winston whined, oh, and made a futile demands for food. Fretted means worried. Fretted about the room, pulling everything. Oh, here it doesn't mean that. Fretted about the room. I think just going around the room. But let's see. Fret about. It's funny because. Oh, wait. The only definition you can find is to be worried about something. So maybe he was walking around the room worried. Maybe that's what they mean by that. So he was walking around the room saying, what am I going to eat? So he fretted about the room, pulling everything out of place and kicking the wainscoting until the neighbors banged boom, boom, boom on the wall, while the younger child wailed intermittently. Wail is like a very large cry, a very large, loud crying. Ah, there's wailing. In the end, his mother said, now be good, and I'll buy you a toy, a lovely toy. You'll love it. And then she had gone out into the rain to a little general shop, which was still sporadically open nearby. Sporadically means you can't really predict it. So if the store is sporadically open, that means you can't really predict when it's going to be open. There's no consistency to it. And came back with a cardboard box containing an outfit of snakes and ladders. He could still remember the smell of the damp cardboard. It was a miserable outfit. The board was cracked, and the tiny wooden dice were so ill cut that they would hardly lie on their sides. Winston looked at the thing sulkily. Sulky is when you're feeling like, it's kind of like anger and depression, like, oh, that's sulking. I don't like it. So his mother went out and bought him this toy, but it was horrible. So he was sitting there like, this is my toy? I hate this toy. That's sulking. It's like enjoying feeling bad. But then his mother lit a piece of candle, and they sat down on the floor to play. Soon he was wildly excited and shouting with laughter. As the tiddlywinks climbed hopefully up the ladder, and then came slithering down the snakes again. Almost to the starting point. They played 8 games, winning 4 each. His tiny sister, too young to understand what the game was about. She had sat propped up against a bolster. When you prop something up, you keep it artificially up because otherwise it will fall. So here, if my arm is like this, it would just fall. But now it can't fall because it's propped up. This is what it means to be propped up. That means putting something to prevent it from falling. From But not falling like falling from a bookshelf, but going from standing position or going from up position to down position. You prop it up so it doesn't do that. And let's see, the sister was propped up against a bolster. What's a bolster? Like a pillow. So the little girl, there was a pillow here and she was kind of leaning against it. If the pillow hadn't been there, she would be on the floor, lying down. For a whole afternoon, they had all been happy together, as in his earlier childhood. He pushed the picture out of his mind. It was a false memory, and he was troubled by false memories occasionally. They did not matter so long as one knew them for what they were. Some things had happened, other things had not happened. He turned back to the chessboard and picked up the white knight again, almost in the same instant, dropped on the board with a clatter. A clatter is like two... This is kind of like that sound. Maybe a little bit more of that. He started as though a pin had run into him. So again, this is start meaning surprised. He started. He started as though a pin had been run into him. So he started like somebody did this with a pin. A shrill trumpet call had pierced his ear. Remember, shrill is that feeling, that horrible feeling you get when you hear the styrofoam sound or the chalkboard sound. It was the bulletin. Victory! It always meant victory when a trumpet call preceded the news. A sort of electric drill ran through the cafe. Even the waiters had started and pricked up their ears. Meaning, they're listening with a lot of attention. The trumpet call had let loose an enormous volume of noise. Already an excited voice was gabbling from the telescreen. But even as it started, it was almost drowned by a roar of cheering from outside. The news had run round the streets like magic. He could hear just enough of what was issuing from the telescreen to realize that it had all happened as he had foreseen. A vast seaborne armada had secretly assembled, a sudden blow in the enemy's rear. The white arrow tearing across the tail of the black. Fragments of triumphant phrases pushed themselves through the din. Vast strategic maneuver, perfect coordination, utter rout, 500,000 prisoners, complete demoralization. Control of the whole of Africa, bring the war within a measurable distance of its end. Victory, greatest victory in human history. Victory, victory, victory. Under the table, Winston's feet made a convulsive movement. Remember, a convulsion is kind of like an involuntary big movement. So his feet were kind of, making an involuntary movement. He had not stirred from his seat, but in his mind he was running. Swiftly running. He was with the crowds outside, cheering himself deaf. He looked up again at the portrait of Big Brother, the colossus that bestrode the world. Hadi says, fret about pacing to and fro in a worrying situation. Yes, if you're fretting about something, you might be pacing to and fro, thinking, what am I going to do? The rock against which the hordes of Asia dashed themselves in vain. He thought how 10 minutes ago, yes, only 10 minutes, there had still been equivocation in his heart as he wondered whether the news from the front would be of victory or defeat. It was more than a Eurasian army that had perished. Perished means like die. Much had changed in him since that first day in the ministry of love. But the final, indispensable healing change had never happened until this moment. The voice of the telescreen was still pouring forth its tale of prisoners and booty. Booty is what you steal. I think in previous wars, maybe even in wars now, when an army invades a country, they might go to people's houses and take their things, take their money, take their valuable possessions, and you would call this booty. Sulk, Hadi is asking what is the difference between sulk and glum. Sulk, well, first of all, sulk is a verb, and it means feeling bad, almost enjoying it. I don't like that toy. I hate that toy. And you just sit there being miserable. That's a verb. I'm sulking. And glum is an adjective. I feel glum. It's a glum day. And I think glum is kind of like depressing. Well, let's see what the definition of glum is. And with sulk, there's a little bit of anger. Yeah, to be glum is to be sad or depressed. You could be sulking and feel glum at the same time. But they're not really the same. The waiters were turning back to their work. One of them approached with the gin bottle. Winston, sitting in a blissful dream, paid no attention as his glass was filled up. He was not running or cheering any longer. He was back in the ministry of love, with everything forgiven, his soul white as snow. He was in the public dock, confessing everything, implicating everybody. He was walking down the white-tiled corridor with a feeling of walking in the sunlight, and an armed guard at his back. The long hoped-for bullet was entering his brain. He gazed up at the enormous face. 40 years it had taken him to learn what kind of smile was hidden beneath the dark mustache. Oh, cruel, needless misunderstanding. Oh, stubborn, self-willed exile from the loving breast. 2 gin-scented tears trickled down the side of his nose. But it was all right. Everything was all right. The struggle was finished. He had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother. The end. Appendix. Okay. I think this is just an explanation of the newspeak. I'm not going to read it. I think that was enough for today. We did 3, not 2, but 3 chapters, and we finally finished the book. So now it will be time to start a new book. And I'm going to read A Brave New World, which is a similar kind of story. It was written about 100 years ago, predicting the future in the same way. Predicting a different kind of future, but still a very depressing kind of future. And people say that it, just like 1984 seems to apply very much to now, this other book, A Brave New World, also does the same thing, but it imagines the future in a different way. But I don't really know. I know about 1984, that story. That's a very famous story. A Brave New World is not so well known, I guess, not as well known as 1984. But I don't know the story, but it should be interesting because people say that it accurately describes how we are living our lives today. Hadi says bolster like a big rounded pillow. Yes, it's like a kind of pillow. I didn't really know what that was. I had to look. I had to look for a picture. Didn't I show it to you? I thought I showed it to you. Okay, well, thank you everybody who stayed and watched, and I hope to see you when I start the new book, A Brave New World, and we'll continue reading depressing stories and talking about vocabulary. Depressing stories that describe the future that is now. Okay, all right, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.